The 7 levels of fighting games explained. Level 1, trash. This is the genre's landfill. Games that don't test your skill. They test how much money a publisher can squeeze out of a license before anyone notices there's no game underneath it. Shaq Fu, Street Fighter the movie, and Rise of the Robots define this level. Yes, Street Fighter the movie is a real game. No, I'm not talking about the actual Street Fighter series. I'm talking about the arcade cash grab based on the Jean-Claude Van Damme film, and somehow it still underdelivers on a movie nobody respected to begin with. The hit detection is so generous you could win a round from a different zip code. Then there's Rise of the Robots, a game so obsessed with looking cool in screenshots that forgot to be playable. One difficulty setting was so unbeatable that reviewers genuinely assumed their copy was broken. Honestly, that might be the most honest design choice in the entire game. And don't even get me started on Shaq Fu, a 7'1" center punching ninjas and a flesh golem to rescue a kid from another dimension sounds incredible on paper. The final product plays like a fever dream you'd get from gas station sushi. And if you want something newer, Fighter with improved Kinect could ruin a fighting game just as easily as it ruined everything else it touched. I get the nostalgic soft spot some of you have for these. I respect the commitment. Nostalgia isn't quality, and these games will lose a depth contest to a coin flip. What separates Level 1 from Level 2 is that these games never had a foundation to begin with. There was no system to break, because there was never a system there. Level 2 at least tried to build one before they dropped it. Level 2, bad. Take a real budget, real talent, and a beloved name, then hand the whole project to a deadline instead of vision. That's this level. Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, Def Jam Icon, and Street Fighter V at launch all belong here. Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite had 2 of the biggest rosters in gaming history. Thanks to a licensing dispute, it launched without most of the X-Men. That's like making a Beatles documentary, and not being allowed to mention John Lennon. The character models look like action figures left too close to a radiator, and casual fans bounced before they even got to see the combat underneath, which honestly wasn't bad at all. Def Jam Icon had one job: follow up one of the best fighting games of the 2000s. Instead of building on the deep grappling that made the original special, it threw that out for a gimmick where the stage damages you. That's fun for about 4 minutes, and then it's the reason you stop playing. And Street Fighter V got rushed out the door to hit an esports calendar instead of a finished product. It shipped without a real story mode, with barely a handful of stages, and a single player offering thin enough to read a newspaper through. The fighting underneath all of that was genuinely solid, which somehow makes it worse, because you could see the great game buried under the launch disaster. It took years of free updates before it became the game it should have been on day one. What separates Level 2 from Level 1 is that these games actually had something worth playing underneath. They just buried it. Unlike Level 3, mid. Level 3, mid. This is the beige carpet of the genre. Games too competent to call bad, and too forgettable to call good. Jump Force, PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale, and most of the Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm games live here. Jump Force put the biggest anime characters on the planet into one game, Goku, Luffy, Naruto, and somehow made every fight feel like 2 action figures bumping into each other in a hallway. The combat never goes past pressing the same 3 buttons in a slightly different order. PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale had the same problem every mascot crossover has when it copies Smash Brothers without understanding why Smash actually works. It played like a tribute act instead of a headliner. And I'm sorry to the Naruto fans, but outside a couple of genuinely great cutscenes, most Ultimate Ninja Storm fights get won by whoever mashes the special button first. That's a polite way of saying there isn't much of a system to learn. None of these are broken. None of these are scams. They just exist, get played for a weekend, and get forgotten the second a real fighting game drops that same year. Unlike Level 4, good. Level 4, good. Now we're talking about games genuinely worth your time, even with real flaws keeping them from the very top. Mortal Kombat 10, Injustice Gods Among Us, and the 2013 Killer Instinct reboot earned their spot here. Mortal Kombat 10 had some of the best content and presentation the series has ever produced. Brutal, cinematic, stacked with modes. But the competitive scene spent years complaining about 50-50 mix-ups, which is a fancy way of saying half the cast could guess at you into a combo, whether you block correctly or not. That kind of design ages badly once a honeymoon period ends. Injustice Gods Among Us built an actual story worth caring about around DC's roster, and environmental interactions made every stage feel alive. But underneath the spectacle, the combat system was noticeably shallower than what the hardcore crowd wanted. So the hype cooled off faster than it should have. And the 2013 Killer Instinct reboot might be the most heartbreaking entry on this list. Its combo breaker system is genuinely one of the smartest mechanics the genre has ever produced, rewarding both the attacker and the defender for actually paying attention. But the game never got the marketing push it deserved, and support quietly dried up while a small, dedicated fan base kept it alive by hand. These games all peaked, and peaked hard. They just couldn't sustain it. What separates Level 4 from Level 5 is consistency. These games gave you a great weekend. Level 5 gives you a great career. Level 5, great. These are games that hit a level of polish and depth that earns real respect, even with one specific thing holding them back from total perfection. Tekken 7, Mortal Kombat 11, and Guilty Gear Strive belong here. Tekken 7 has some of the deepest three-dimensional combat ever put into a fighting game. Sidesteps and spacing genuinely matter, and the roster carries 20 years of personality. And yet the story mode is so committed to dead serious melodrama about a family feud that it becomes unintentionally hilarious. Mortal Kombat 11 finally gave the series a story mode that didn't feel like an afterthought, with smart time travel writing and gorgeous presentation. But it leaned so hard into random crushing blow effects that matches could swing on a coin flip instead of a reed. And Guilty Gear Strive is gorgeous. The soundtrack alone might be the best in the genre, and it's the most welcoming the series has ever been to newcomers. But that accessibility came at the cost of some of the deep movement options longtime fans spent a decade mastering. I know some of you are going to fight me on Strive specifically, and that's fair. Taste and execution barriers is personal, but accessible and shallow aren't the same thing, and I think Strive proves it. What these three share is that they're not held back by one bad decision. They're held back by one specific trade-off, which is a much higher class of problem to have. And speaking of trade-offs, it would mean a lot if you could help this channel reach 1,000 subscribers. And it's completely free. I make these videos after work most nights because ranking things I have strong, possibly unhinged opinions about is genuinely the best part of my day. Thank you for sitting through this one with me. Level 6, amazing. This is cultural dominance. Games that don't just succeed within the genre. They expand what the genre is allowed to be. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, Dragon Ball FighterZ, and Street Fighter 3 Third Strike belong here. Smash Ultimate took the wildest crossover idea in gaming history. Every major character from every major franchise on one stage, and still built one of the deepest competitive movement systems in the genre underneath all that chaos. That's why it works equally well as a party game and a tournament main stage, a balancing act almost nothing else in gaming has pulled off. Dragon Ball FighterZ proved an anime fighting game could look exactly like the show in motion, while still rewarding genuine technical execution underneath. Tag mechanics, vanish timing, neutral skips, real systems that reward thousands of hours of practice, wrapped in presentation good enough to make every anime fighter before it looked like a rough draft. And Street Fighter 3 Third Strike might be the most influential fighting game most casual players have never actually played. Its parry system rewarded reading your opponent over memorizing combos, and it's a game behind Evo Moment 37, one of the most replayed clips in competitive gaming history. People are still showing that clip to new fans more than 2 decades later. These games took real risks instead of playing it safe, and instead of those risks blowing up in their face, the risks became the genre's entire identity going forward. What keeps them from the very top isn't really a flaw. Even genre-defining brilliance needs time to prove it's permanent, and that a test only a handful of games ever get to take. Level 7, GOAT. We've reached the games that didn't just join the genre. They invented it or perfected it so completely that everything after them is working in their shadow, whether it admits it or not. Street Fighter 2, Super Smash Bros. Melee, Tekken 3, and Soul Calibur belong here. Street Fighter 2 didn't just become a hit. It created an entire industry overnight. Arcades rearranged their floor plans around it, and the language we still use today, combos, fireballs, footsies, traces back to one cartridge. Decades later, people are still finding new tech in a game older than some of its own players. Super Smash Bros. Melee is the strangest entry on this list, because the developers never intended it to become a deep, frame-perfect competitive game. The wave dashing and tech skill the community discovered were technically bugs. That accidental depth created one of the most beloved, longest-running competitive scenes in gaming, still selling out tournaments more than 20 years later. Tekken 3 took three-dimensional fighting, something every other developer was still struggling to make feel fair, and turned into the best-selling fighting game of its era. The movement and sidestepping were tuned so well that it's still the blueprint every Tekken game since is built on top of. And Soul Calibur didn't just succeed critically. It became one of the only games ever to receive a perfect 10 from a major gaming outlet. The weapon-based combat felt deep enough for experts and readable enough for total beginners, which might be the hardest balance to strike in this entire genre. These 4 games share something nothing else on this list does. Nobody talks about them like products anymore. People talk about them like history. And if your favorite game didn't make this list, there's a good chance I'm saving it for part 2. If you want to see where your favorite game actually landed, let me know in the comments, because there's a good chance it's earning a spot in part 2. Don't forget to subscribe to help this channel reach 1,000 subscribers. We are so close, and it's completely free. Thanks for watching.